Hello, everybody. Forgive the background noise, but it's a beautiful day, and I thought we'd talk outside today about the third and fourth movements of the Eroica Symphony. So, the third movement of a symphony is kind of a strange holdover from a previous era. Symphonies can have four movements, or three, or five. If they only have three, we skip this movement. There is no third movement. We go one, two, and then straight to what's normally the fourth movement. But when we have four, we keep an old style dance. So here's what happened back in the day, back 100 years before Beethoven. The way you'd write a symphonic piece is you'd have dances. You'd have a gavotte and a jig and a saraband, whatever that is, and then a minuet and maybe even a waltz. You'd have a set of dances. And then that set together makes one piece of music. Well, in the symphony, those movements have been replaced. The first movement, remember, is fast and usually in sonata form. The second is slow. It can be lots of forms, theme and variation or sonata or song form, lots of things. And then we hit the third movement. The third movement stays like an old dance suite. It's traditionally what's called a minuet and trio. So first of all, what's a minuet? A minuet is that thing we see in so many of the old movies that don to do the very careful dance. It's a 3/4 dance. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Like a waltz in the beat, but the accent is different. Not very fast, very graceful. It's called a minuet. And like all dances, we mentioned this in an earlier lecture, but you may have forgotten. You start with a theme, and then you repeat that. And in music, we have a symbol. We put two lines and two dots. That tells you we're going to repeat it. You have a theme, you repeat. Then you have a new theme, and then you bring back part of the first theme, and then you repeat that. So it's A, that's the first theme, repeat. Then B, A, and then we repeat that. A, repeat, B, A, B, A. That's the form of a minuet or any dance. It's a classical way of doing the dances or popular music. That's really short. As the first movements get longer, the second movements get longer. It's clear a minuet's too short. So what do? Stick on a second minuet. They don't call it a second minuet. In the old days, it was called a double. We understand that. But for a reason that nobody knows, in the classical era, that second minuet is called a trio. Trio normally means three people performing together. Not here. A trio just means a second minuet. So all a trio means a second minuet. So you have a section that repeats, and then a new section, and then that first section. So it's A, repeat. B, A, repeat. Now it's a second minuet, so we have to call it C, repeat. Then D, C, repeat. And then at the end of a minuet and trio, we repeat the minuet again, but without the repeat. So it's just A, B, A. That's it. Minuet, trio, minuet without repeats. Trio, just a second minuet. That's the form of the third movement. But here's the problem. It's a slow dance. 1, 2, 3. We've just had a slow movement. The audience is dozing, and they got another moderately slow movement, and they're falling asleep. So composers realized they had to write something faster. They needed something quicker. So what they wrote instead was what's called a scherzo. Now this is a funny-looking word. It's S-C-H-E-R-Z-O. Z is pronounced as T-Z, so, and S-C-H is pronounced as an S-K, scherzo. So scherzo is this word. It looks like scherzo or something. Scherzo. It's the Italian word for joke. And all they did is they take a minuet and you play it really fast. So instead of being 1, 2, 3, it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. You can't dance to it. So it's a joke. It's a scherzo. You can't dance to it. Funny. Well, it's not that funny, but it's much more exciting. So many composers wrote these scherzos. Now, when you follow the form of a scherzo, it's just like the minuets, A, B, A. But the thing is, if A is short and you play it fast, it's really short. So the themes tend to be a lot longer. The transitions tend to be a lot longer. So on paper, it looks much, much more confusing, and it's hard to follow. And when you have the listening map, it's very hard to follow it because it just goes by so fast. I mean, it flies by. But it's fun to try. At least see if you can follow it because, I mean, it's just fun to try. So the third movement of the Eroica Symphony, a symphony by Beethoven, is in fact a scherzo in the form of minuet and trio, but fast. And it's not a perfect example of the form. He plays some tricks with it, and that's important to note because remember, we're trying to figure out if he's classical or romantic, if he's coming from the Enlightenment view or the romantic view. Form is a clue to that. But that's the third movement. Now, fourth movements, the only real rule about a fourth movement is it's quick. That's the usual rule. Fourth movement, last movement, fast. You gotta get applause. That's what it's all about. But there are lots of possible forms. Sometimes you're back in sonata form. Sometimes you're in a form called rondo form. And sometimes you're in a theme and variation. And theme and variation is a really interesting form. You take a melody. We call it a theme because theme is a little more universal. But take sort of a melody, and you write the melody, and then you play music that's the same length as the melody, but you've changed it. You've added some notes or changed the harmony or changed the orchestration. You've done something. That's called a variation. Then you take the same length of music and you play it again with more changes. That's the second variation. And the third variation. And theme and variations is very common for the last movement. Whereas the theme come from, it can come from anywhere. It can come from a popular song. It can be original to that composition. It can be borrowed from another composer. But here's what makes the Eroica theme and variation so interesting. The theme is actually the melody that's used in the last movement of the Prometheus ballet. Remember we heard that music? And that music is in Anglaise. And Anglaise is this contra dance where everyone switches partners so that nobles had to dance with lowborn and vice versa. It was a symbol of democracy. So it's not a surprise he would take an Anglaise as his music for Napoleon, perhaps, if that's the intention. And he does weird things with it. So if you've ever noticed, if you look at a rock band or a jazz band, there's always a person playing the bass guitar or stand-up bass. Paul McCartney from the Beatles, bass player. Sting, bass player. Many of the great players were bass players because in classical music or in Western music, classical or pop, there's usually two sort of melodies going at once. There's the melody you sing, and there's a second melody, which is the bass line. Sometimes it's very complicated, sometimes it's very trivial. Well, Beethoven starts with just the bass line of the Anglaise. He's going to build from the bass, and I don't know why. We get the side, so you hear this boom, 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 boom. That's the bass line to the Anglaise. He does some variations on the bass line. Then he brings back the original melody straight out of the ballet, straight out of a set of piano variations too. And then he's going to do those variations for a while, and then he's going to do strange things. And you're going to see in the map words like fugue. Fugue is, let me just say, is something like around. It's kind of, around like row, row, row your boat. One voice comes in, then another comes in with the same melody, a little different. It's not exactly the same, but something like that. Otherwise, I think the terminology will be pretty clear. We don't have enough time to go to all the detail. It's a very rich piece. But you're going to see it's a theme and variation, plus it's not. And it's a variation on the melody, and it's variations on the bass line. It's a kind of a strange movement, but it's all built on this Anglaise. And I think that the audience at that time, even if they didn't know it was from the ballet, would recognize the kind of dance it is. So go ahead and listen, have some fun, and then we're going to have some discussion on the discussion board. So look forward to seeing you on the discussion board. Remember, there's almost always a quiz, and I've also got some PowerPoint slides. So enjoy the Eroica Symphony.